Coming up, we have the latest news around the U.S. Supreme Court's McGirt decision, meet some Yurok fishermen, and take a look at personal finances for Native people. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian country today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian country today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. The Interior Department is taking more steps to ensure the safety of Native children who attend Bureau of Indian Education schools. The agency announced Thursday that all staff and faculty at BIE facilities will need to be vaccinated against COVID-19 no later than October 15th. Secretary Deb Haaland issued an order saying educators will be required to provide proof of vaccination to their school leaders. If educators do not comply, they will be subject to disciplinary action that can include non-renewal of their contracts or being fired. Exceptions can be made for those who cannot be vaccinated due to the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Biden-Harris administration has made similar moves with other federal agencies, including the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense. The pandemic is putting tribal sovereignty at the forefront for tribal nations. The Guardian reports tribes are asserting their powers as sovereign nations by ensuring children and staff wear face coverings at schools. Some tribal nations are requiring masks, even if they're in states that don't have a mask mandate. Tribal nations like the Meskwaki Indian settlement in Iowa have mandated masks for its schools. And the Hopi and White Mountain Apache tribes in Arizona require masks despite being in a state that does not have a mask requirement. Other indigenous communities have implemented their own testing and vaccine orders for students and faculty on their reservations as COVID cases surge. The U.S. Education Department's Civil Rights Enforcement arm is investigating 5 states to determine whether their ban on mask mandates discriminates against students with disabilities. A camp of homeless people will have to find another place to live after the city of Denver, Colorado removes their homeless encampment. It surrounded the Four Winds American Indian Council. According to Westword.com, the sweep started early Tuesday morning and pushed out about 20 people camped in the grass in front of the center. Most of the people are Native American. The center had been providing drinking water and electricity to the people. Residents of the encampment and leadership from Four Winds American Indian Council met with Mayor Michael Hancock virtually last Monday afternoon. They said the mayor told them he had to enforce the law. Denver has multiple laws it uses when clearing out encampments, including a camping ban and a public right-of-way ordinance. Denver officials have continued sweeping homeless encampments throughout most of the pandemic, despite the CDC advising against sweeps unless individual housing is available. Indigenous communities in New Brunswick, Canada, say climate change is threatening their way of life. From sacred medicines to sweat lodge ceremonies, this change is taking a toll on traditions. The CBC reports in the past 30 years, the province has seen an increase to the temperature by 1 degree every year. According to New Brunswick officials, this is prompting rising sea levels, increased flooding, and extreme weather events. Sophia Sidaris is a Mi'kmaq traditional harvester and sees the effect of those changes all around her. Sidaris says the browning of cedar trees and the scarcity of sweetgrass poses a health risk to her people. The province is putting its own climate action plan into effect, and the Department of Environment and local government is in discussions with First Nation organizations about climate change. But in the meantime, the changes continue to take a toll. A feast day on YouTube. That's what the Pueblo of Acoma in New Mexico did. The tribal nation celebrated its annual feast day by producing a live 2.5-hour online event on Thursday. The Pueblo decided to skip its usual feast day celebrations of traditional dancing as a COVID-19 precaution. Instead, Acoma honored its patron saint, Estevan, with an online mass, buffalo dances, and remarks from tribal officials. The governor of Acoma, Brian Vayo, addressed his community, wishing them a good day.
May your prayers be answered. Whatever you pray for, may our Creator continue to give you that strength.
The live stream was watched by more than 1,000 people online. And those are the headlines for Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalohungva. This week, we look at the latest news around the U.S. Supreme Court's McGirt decision, meet some Yurok fishermen, and take a look at personal finances for Native people.
This is Indian Country Today.
In 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the conviction of child rapist Jim C. McGirt on the grounds that the Muskogee Creek Nation's reservation boundaries were never disestablished for criminal jurisdiction. State courts no longer have the authority to prosecute crimes committed by or against Oklahomans who are also tribal members. The court specifically limited its decision to major crimes within the Muskogee Nation, but Oklahoma state courts have acknowledged that it effectively applies to the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole Nations as well. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt's administration has filed suit in U.S. District Court in Oklahoma City to overturn the decision. Cherokee Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. and Attorney General Sarah Hill reacted to the decision earlier this week.
He lacks any depth of understanding of tribal sovereignty. Anyone that does would be celebrating this decision, whether you're Native or not, because it means that the government of the United States has to keep a promise to a tribe and to a number of tribes, to 5 tribes. That ought to be something in 2021 that we celebrate. It does create some changes in criminal jurisdiction. That much is absolutely true. They're only unmanageable if we don't work together. And Governor Stitt has set down a course where he doesn't want to work with the tribes. We're working every day, though, to implement McGirt, to meet our obligations under McGirt, and really build the best criminal justice system in the country. That's what we're trying to do at the Cherokee Nation. It'd be good if the governor would join us in that effort.
We're working on implementing McGirt, and that means, the Cherokee Nation accepted a lot of obligations when it signed the treaties between the United States and the Cherokee Nation, and we've been ready, able and willing to implement our obligations under those treaties for a long time. And we are glad to be able to get to work and begin prosecuting crime on our reservation. So, we are, not that we aren't busy, not that it isn't challenging at times, but we are eager for an opportunity to display to the world what we think the Cherokee Nation can do, what tribal justice could look like, and how that could be beneficial for all Oklahomans. That's our focus every day.
So we've got 70 cross-deputization agreements with jurisdictions across our reservations. And cross-deputization agreements are not new to the Cherokee Nation. Most of those I mentioned, most of the 70, the lion's share actually, were in place long before anyone ever heard of McGirt. That's because we've recognized for a long time that it's in our best interest, and the state has as well, to work together. So on the front lines, when an arrest is being made, if it's a local police officer under cross-deputization, they're really wearing the Cherokee Nation Marshal badge, and vice versa. And when we work together, when there's a clear process, there's no reason that law enforcement can't be administered smoothly on our reservation. In fact, it has been. And so we're committed to continue to work along those lines.
I think that that's exactly right. I mean, we talk to, members of state law enforcement every single day. This morning, I had a phone call from a chief of police of a small town in the reservation and just had a few questions that he wanted to walk through. We've, sent out a law enforcement protocol to all of the different law enforcement agencies within the reservation so that they would have 24-hour contact information for the AG's office, my office, where the prosecution happens, for the Marshal Service, and for victim services. So there would never be a time when they would not have a number they could call and talk to a real human about the issues that might be arising, because we know that this is new for a lot of people. Tribal jurisdiction is not new, tribal law enforcement is not new, but there are a lot of people who this is their first experience with it. So, we've worked really hard to reach out, to talk to the district attorneys, the first assistants, law enforcement. I mean, there's no level of this where every day there's not communication between my office and the different offices of state law enforcement on the reservation. And those everyday conversations show an increasing amount of cooperation, increasing capacity on the ground. And that's why it's always, disheartening when you see a news story which has this the tribes in the state can't work together narrative, because that's not my day-to-day experience. My day-to-day experience is the state and the tribes work together really well.
I was a little generous to the governor in my opening remarks and said that he merely didn't understand McGirt. The fact is, he's the most anti-tribal sovereignty governor we've had in Oklahoma in generations, and he's proving it by trying to go back to the Supreme Court to have what was a sound decision on whether the United States ought to be good to its word. He's trying to get that overturned. Look, if the governor of the state of Oklahoma took an ounce of the cooperative spirit that our Attorney General, Sarah Hill, has, or that I have, or that any of the 5 tribe leaders have, we'd be working every day constructively, working through the inevitable challenges that come up whenever you change jurisdictional procedures and processes. But because he is bent on destroying tribal sovereignty, and look, all you have to do is look at his record to see that, this is what we get. We get a governor who's painting a phony narrative that there's chaos in the state of Oklahoma. He's going to the Supreme Court to ask the United States to renege on its promise. Can you imagine that in 2021, governor of the state of Oklahoma asking the United States to go back on its word? My goodness, what century is this? But that's what we're dealing with in Oklahoma. The good news is that, what the Attorney General just said about local law enforcement, we have this cooperative relationship at the local level, at the county level, and among many state leaders. Governor Stitt is kind of once again on an island. He has an appointed attorney general that agrees with his agenda, but most state leaders believe that we can work through this.
That was Cherokee Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. and Attorney General Sarah Hill. When we come back, the Uroc Tribe takes us fishing for a subsistence way of life. The Uroc Tribe in Northern California is finding creative solutions to addressing food insecurity. The Carnegie Night News 21 project has this report. It's produced by Mackenzie Wilkes with Beth Wallace and Nancy Spears from Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication.
It'll last way longer. Yeah, because it's just holding that water in there right now.
All right, so we're ready to get on the road?
Yeah, let's roll.
Behind the red church up there. Yeah. Around.
Oh, we can do the seats and all that.
What we need is we want people who depend on the river to have, access to fish so they can continue to survive and continue to feed their families. Because in reality, when it comes to spring salmon, there's not that many left on the Klamath River. And you can see why. Just by looking outside our boat right here, look at the conditions of our river. It shouldn't be like this.
What can we do to make sure that we are able to sustain ourselves in case of a large-scale catastrophe? COVID-19 was kind of an eye-opener that sometimes larger systems go down. So what can we do to make sure that that we can help support our people through those tough times?
The person who bought this property that we're going to right now. We want our people to be able to say, yes, I can grow a garden. Yes, I have the resources to do so. And yes, I'm going to invest these resources back into my community, because recreating these systems of reciprocity between indigenous people and the land that we all live and depend on, these have been broken by years and years of genocide. Sovereignty for me means that we have the ability to maintain and we have the ability to improve the system that we're part of, that our ancestors laid down before us, to give us guidelines on how to provide these healthy opportunities. That's where the answer is that we have more families involved in producing their own food.
There is like a type of island effect that happens because of road closures or interruptions to the food system where there's not sufficient food to transport up here, that we can sustain ourselves like from within the reservation, because this is such a rural community that like a single landslide can really isolate. The Yurok Reservation has been declared a food desert by the USDA. This property where the Klamath Food Village is going to be constructed was actually purchased with CARES Act funding that the Uroc Tribe was allocated. So that's part of our COVID-19 response, was used in recognition of needing space to produce food, to address food sovereignty. Over here is more of like a marshland kind of area that's like perfect for growing, like some traditional teas would maybe do well over there, like a Labrador tea.
We're not growing food because we want to be a successful nonprofit organization. We're growing food because we want to feed our families. We're not out here on the river just to make money. We're out here on the river because this is what makes us happy. This is who we are. And we want to continue to do this. And we want more people to be able to do this. And the only way we can do that is if we have healthy river. You know, it's really unsettling actually, you know, as a salmon person, as a fisherman, because people call us activists all the time and doing that, but in reality we're not activists, we're fishermen. And my motives are kind of selfish out of all this because I want to live a good life. You know, I want my family to live a good life. You know, I want to be a fisherman, but I understand that if I want to continue to be a fisherman, if I want to continue to fish to provide for my family, there's certain things I have to learn. There's certain policies that I have to push. There's certain things that I have to do to maintain my way of life on this river.
Many families need help when it comes to understanding credit scores, budgeting, and overall financial management. They may have questions on how to build assets or determine which bank account is the right fit. And some natives don't even have bank accounts, mostly due to living in remote areas. Joining us today are two people from the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition, also known as ONAC. It's a national nonprofit organization dedicated to working with tribes to help create opportunities for economic self-sufficiency for tribal citizens. I talked to Executive Director Christy Feinsel and financial coach Felicia Freeman.
The Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition is a direct service provider. That's kind of one of the hats we wear. And so we provide seed funding for children's savings accounts, emergency savings accounts, during the pandemic, emergency cash assistance, down payment assistance, and also incentives to help individuals open a bank account. And then we also are an intermediary grant funder. So we support other Native nonprofits and tribes to be able to implement their own asset building programs. We provide national research on Native asset building and also resource guides. And then we also coordinate the National Native Earned Income Tax Credit and Voluntary Income Tax Assistance Network, as well as the National Native Get Banked campaign.
We hear a lot about credit scores in commercials, but what is a credit score?
Typically, most people in general don't really know the algorithm that makes up the credit score. So we do share the FICO credit matrix and talk about the TransUnion algorithm and how the others are generally the same, just a little bit less of a percentage on each category. But most people really don't know what makes up their credit score. And that I didn't know. I'm going to be honest with you. I started with the Citizen Potawatomi Community Development 15 years ago, and I didn't have bad credit. I just didn't have a score because I didn't use Main Street banking. I had a vehicle that was reliable. Of course, it was paid for, so it was a $5,000 vehicle. So we're not taught these things in school. So most people don't know it.
One way to establish a credit score is to get a credit card. Is that a good idea?
I typically don't suggest a credit card for a client unless we've done a complete budget session and I know that they can afford to do it and I know that their behavior towards credit and using it is, like you said, based on acquiring an asset and only using it as a tool to build their credit score. For those that are ready for a secured credit card or a mainstream credit card, I suggest that they use it for gas and groceries, things that they already have in their budget. And then I'd go one step further and say, go ahead and deduct that from your check register or your debit card log so that it looks like you've taken the money from your savings or your checking account to pay for those things. And then at the end of the month, when the bill comes before the interest is due, just write the check and pay them all off.
And tell us about bank accounts.
According to FDIC data, 50.5% of American Indians and Alaska Natives are unbanked or underbanked. So by unbanked, they wouldn't have any checking or savings account. And by kind of underbanked, maybe they have some kind of like a card or prepaid card, where they can put some money on it, but there are high fees associated with using that. And so, or maybe they, go to a payday lender to get some services and also are paying higher fees. If they were just able to deposit the check they've received, for example, for emergency cash assistance into a savings account, they wouldn't be incurring a fee for that deposit. During this pandemic, we've been distributing emergency cash assistance across the country by region. And so when individuals do not have a bank account and maybe they're in a very rural area, especially during the pandemic, it's been challenging, right? Because we want to try to get the cash assistance to them. And so some of them have to drive a ways to try to deposit the check. If they do have a savings or checking account, then they can accept an ACH transfer. And so we were making transfers that way. But, some tribal citizens can be, 4 times away than the kind of typical length or distance from an ATM. If there's maybe no financial institution nearby, but there's a market that will cash a check, they can only handle so many checks during a short period of time if we were going to, try to deliver 100 into a certain community. So, we've been trying to figure out ways to make it work, given the situation that some are unbanked or underbanked.
I think most importantly, the concepts of conserving our resources is nothing new to our Native people. Our ancestors have planned, they've saved, and they've reserved their resources for the different seasons of their life, spring, summer, fall, and winter. So I start off the counseling session by reminding each one of our participants that what they're learning is nothing new, it's just a different strategy.
That was Executive Director Christy Feinsell and Financial Coach Felicia Freeman from the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition. One of the most exciting dances at the powwow is the Fancy Feather Dance. Wyoming PBS brings us this video with George Abeda. He's Eastern Shoshone from Fort Washakie, Wyoming. Let's watch.
As dancers, we pay homage and we pay respect to those who danced before us. We pay honor, respect, and homage to our drum and our singers. For without that drum and without our singers, there would be no dancing. The old ones tell us that the heartbeat is that drum beat. The heartbeat of Mother Earth is that drum beat. As long as there's that drum beat, as long as there's a heartbeat for Mother Earth, there will be a beautiful life. So we celebrate this way. Each of those powwow categories has specific songs that go with it. A true mark of a championship drum group is their ability to pull up the appropriate song at a moment's notice. That song, that drum beat, those voices has great power. You can feel that positive, uplifting power of the drum. It's healing. It's good medicine for the people. Some say that the best dancers, especially the fancy feather, the fancy shawl, some of the chicken dancers, they say that they're the best athletes in the world. And I don't doubt it when they say that, because it is very rigorous. Some of the songs are fast tempo and you have to keep up with those drums. And sometimes there's a tie. Maybe the judges cannot make up their mind and they ask for another song and another song and another song to break that tie, to pick their favorite dancer. So you have to be in really good shape. The old ones tell us that our songs and our dances, this powwow way of life, brings blessings of strength and happiness to the people. So when we have the opportunity to dance, we share that blessing with the people.
For more news and updates this holiday weekend, visit IndianCountryToday.com. On behalf of our entire news crew, have a great weekend. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Dalahungva.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This is Indian Country Today.